All right. Are you guys familiar with that urban myth that if you put a frog in a pot of boiling water, it will instantly leap out? But if you put it in a pot filled with pleasantly tepid water and gradually heat it, the frog will remain in the water until it boils to death. Well, that is a fitting metaphor for our democracy right now. As our democratic norms erode within America, we must wonder, will this democracy survive? Well, a Yahoo News poll says no. But perhaps when you build a nation on stolen land with stolen labor, it was never going to be a republic we could keep. So let's talk about the possible fall of democracy and what, if anything, can be done to keep it. Elie Mystal is back with me, and joining the panel is Sarah Kendzior, author of Hiding in Plain Sight and co-host of the podcast Gaslit Nation, and the nemesis heard around the world, Dr. Jason Johnson, MSNBC political contributor and professor of journalism and politics at Morgan State University. Glad to have you all here. This is such a wild time that we live in. Jason, I'm going to bring you in first here because you and I have talked about this a lot. We'll pick up the conversation on our live later, but how likely is a civil war in this country? Because in 10 years, I just wonder if the United States will still be united because it's not looking so likely. And what should we be considering when we're thinking about the lead up to whatever is going to happen?
So this is the thing I need people to understand so that they don't think we're being hyperbolic, right? A civil war in the way that we see it in the United States is, oh, North versus South and, and red versus gray and books and stuff like that. That's not how all civil wars operate. In many countries, a civil war manifests itself by having large sections of the country that cannot be managed or controlled by the central government, right? That is something that is possible in the United States. There are sections of this country that, look, right now, the Bundy Ranch was an offshoot, right? But we have sections of this country right now where white nationalists and militant groups and stuff like that are beginning to train, beginning to expand. They're beginning to get political leaders in office who don't want to listen to the federal government. So in 10, 12 years, heck, in 4 years, if we have a legislature in Georgia or Iowa or Nebraska or something else like that that says we no longer recognize the validity of the Joe Biden administration, that is sort of a precursor for civil war. That's what happens when you have within a civil society a lack of agreement on who's actually running the country. So it's not as far-fetched as people think. And I think the country needs to understand that it doesn't always have to look the way it has in the past to be something dangerous for our future.
Right. And, I think you make a good point, Jason, because, Sarah, I want to ask you, there are things happening around us every single day that people are just going about their lives and not necessarily noticing, hey, the water temperature is almost boiling at this point. What are some warning signs that are happening in society right now that is foreshadowing the potential fall of American democracy?
Well, what we're going through now is a culmination. It is not something new. It has been building to this point for years and for decades. I think the fact that we have an unpunished, seditious, violent attack on the Capitol 18 months later, that's finally being addressed through hearings and has not been addressed by the DOJ in terms of targeting the elite operatives who organized it. That's a giant warning sign. The attack on voting rights, the attack on civil rights, and also a lot of the rhetoric we're hearing about the quote unquote civil war, that people have these romantic, very misguided fantasies about. There is no such thing as a red state or a blue state. As I've said many times, America is purple. It is purple like a bruise. These categories were created by political operatives during the 2000 highly contested presidential election. And people who are greedy, people who want to strip this country down and sell it off for parts, are weaponizing these categories now by presenting very complicated states full of a diverse array of people, full of cities and rural areas and just, a multitude of Americas within each state as these hardened, immutable entities. They want a situation akin to what happened to Yugoslavia, to the fall of Yugoslavia and the Balkan Wars of the 1990s. That's the kind of chaos and exploitation of that chaos that they crave. And so it's very important that Americans stand united. That does not mean denying our problems. It means confronting them head on for the benefit of all, because all this talk about civil war or secession or blue paradises or red paradises, it is fatuous. It is going to hurt every ordinary American citizen. It is only going to benefit the criminal elite.
And speaking of the criminal elite, Ellie, Sarah just made some really good points. You know, you and I have talked about how there is the legislative branch of this country that's failing. There's also the judicial branch of this country. We're looking at very different justice systems play out for people. I know there's a lot of frustration around what the DOJ is doing and pursuing when it comes to January 6th. And I wonder, people who have committed much lighter crimes that did not try to overthrow the government, as they look at this justice system play out not in their favor, how incentivized would they be to help save this democracy when their interaction with the state is very different from what upper crust white privileged people experience?
A civil war implies two sides fighting. Why would the MAGA side fight when they've already captured the courts? I mean, I get to course correct now on live television because you want to talk about a person who also has been on Merrick Garland from the very beginning. It is Sarah, right to my right. Like, she has been on it. And one of the reasons why she has been on it is that Sarah and I and Jason, we understand that when these people take control of the courts, they don't have to go to the street fighting. We have a case coming up in the Supreme Court next term that will legalize, and this is what people need to understand about what they're going to do. It will all be legal. What the insurrection, if you want to call it, the war, the authoritarian takeover of our nation will be made legal by the Supreme Court. And when you see the, shall we say, tepid reaction to the court's decision in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health, when you see the willingness of people to just accept Supreme Court pronouncements without fighting back, what you see is everything in place for the court to retroactively give the imprimatur of legitimacy to any civil insurrection or authoritarian takeover of our government. They're not going to need to fight. They're gonna have everything in place to do it legally.
But Ellie, I want to stick with you here because you're saying, why would they fight? And yes, some will have the opportunity to do it legally, but there's also just when it gets taken to the streets. I mean, one side far out armored compared to the rest of us. And I do think that we could see droves of political violence happen just like we saw on January 6th, particularly when you think about those state legislatures that are not as protected as the U.S. Capitol. So when it comes to I do wonder what that looks like.
I just finished reading Malcolm Nance's new book, They Want to Kill Americans. I know Jason Johnson has had Malcolm on his podcast.
He's coming
recently.
up on this show. He'll be on this show at the top of the 11, so stay tuned.
It's scary.
Yeah.
He lays out the scary scenario for insurrection in our country. So, yes, I do think that is also the street level fighting is also a possibility. It's also something to be worried about. But again, if somebody comes and busts me up, the question is, will anybody hold that person accountable? Will the district attorney or the attorney general or the Supreme Court hold these people accountable if they attack me and my community? And so far, the answer consistently has been no. And that to me is the most terrifying problem.